Hello and welcome back to all our wood chatters. We've heard a lot this series about the forest and wood products industry and some of the innovations that are supporting its future growth and evolution. But the big question is why? Is there really the need, demand, or indeed the desire for timber to be used as the primary material in construction projects over accepted alternatives?
Well, the people behind the Make It Wood program at Planet Ark would certainly say so.
The Make It Wood program?
Yeah, it's an initiative that aims to educate and encourage the increased use of responsibly sourced timber as a building material due to the variety of compelling benefits when compared to other materials, not least when it comes to its environmental creds. I met with David Rowlinson, the Make It Wood campaign manager at Planet Ark, to find out more.
So we're here to talk about some of the benefits of using timber in construction. Wondered if you could start by telling us a bit about the environmental benefits of using timber.
I certainly can. Yeah, my name's David and I work for Planet Ark, and the focus of the campaign is to promote the use of sustainably sourced timber as a building material. And the main reason for that, of course, is environmental. And there are basically four main reasons why we advocate so strongly for the increased use of timber as a building material. The first, of course, is that it's renewable. It's the only renewable mainstream building material we have. We talk about a concept called ecological footprinting, living on nature's interest, not its capital. Now, to put that into context, Yale University did a study in 2014, so 4 years ago, and they looked at the whole of the world's forests and concluded that the volume of timber contained in the world's forests is 385 billion cubic metres. They also reckon there's an additional 17 billion growing per annum, and that we're actually using 3.4 billion. So we're using 20% of the additional growth, not the existing growth. So living on nature's interest, not its capital. No other building material can make that claim. The second, of course, is that wood stores carbon. To create a kilo of timber, a tree will absorb 1.47 kilos of CO2, removing it from the atmosphere, which is obviously good from a climate change perspective, and that's called carbon sequestration. It'll emit about a kilo of oxygen, which is obviously good for us because that's what we breathe, and it'll leave us with a kilo of timber. And of that timber, about 50% of the dry weight of timber is carbon. And the great advantage in the building industry is that carbon can then be stored for many, many decades, century, even millennia. The oldest building in the world is the Horyu Temple in Japan, which was first erected in 710. So that's been storing carbon for over 1,300 years.
Oh, wow.
So it's pretty amazing. The third environmental benefit that timber provides is it has very low, what we call embodied energy. All the energy that goes into its manufacture and production of any product, including timber or concrete or steel, is called embodied energy. And timber has a small fraction of the embodied energy that concrete or steel, which are very high carbon-intensive materials, would create. And as a rule of thumb, if you can convert a cubic metre of a solid material like concrete to a cubic metre of timber, it's going to divert about a tonne or about 1,000 kilos of CO2 from going into the atmosphere. And the great benefit about that is there's a concept called avoided carbon. We get the benefit immediately. We don't have to wait for the life of the building to get that benefit. It happens instantaneously because we're not emitting emissions that would otherwise have been emitted had we used more carbon-intensive materials. Yeah. And the fourth reason is that timber can and should be certified. There are two major certification bodies in the world, and the significant majority of timber is certified by one or other of those. And that guarantees that the timber comes from sustainably sourced, well-managed forests or plantations. And it also guarantees that when a tree is harvested, another is planted in its place. So we get the benefit of the renewability of timber. So those are really the four main reasons that Planet Ark and the Make It Wood campaign so steadfastly support the use of increased amounts of timber in the construction sector.
And so if everybody was to, in an ideal world, switch to timber right now, what's the availability?
Well, timber is available. That said, we import a lot more. Very sadly, in Australia, we import more timber than we export. And a number of the larger buildings do rely on timber which is imported from either Europe or North America. So timber is an abundant resource, and I guess it really depends on the amount of access that we get to timber. So certainly we need more plantation. We need to make sure that there are initiatives in place and government legislation and intervention to make sure that we can grow the plantation resource, but also make sure that access to natural or native forest, where it's appropriate, it also provides an additional source of timber. So yes, theoretically, either on a worldwide case or even in Australia, there's no reason at all why timber shouldn't be widely available, but we need to make sure we put in the appropriate processes to avail ourselves of that.
What other benefits would go alongside the adoption of timber as a construction material?
There are a number of others. One of the ones that's becoming increasingly prevalent is the health benefit that we get from using natural materials like timber. It's a process called biophilia or biophilic design.
Yep.
Bio meaning natural, philia is opposite to a phobia. Phobia is something we fear, a philia is something we love. So put them together, you get biophilia.
Yes,
and
had a conversation with Professor Jackie Shermer about some recent research on
indeed, and it is a fascinating area of subject, and indeed Planet Ark published a report on that just over a year ago, which pulled together research from around the world that shows quite conclusively the benefit that we get from using natural materials and this type of environment. Because one of the problems in Australia, we've got with the most urban society in the world, so we're getting an increasing disconnect with the natural environment.
Yeah.
And that's correlating with increased levels of obesity and mental health issues. So the whole notion of biophilia or biophilic design, using natural materials like timber, is to bring the natural environment indoors.
Yeah.
Because what the research shows quite clearly that by using timber in this way, it actually mimics the effect of spending time in nature. And we know from a vast amount of research that just 10 minutes a day is all it takes. If you can get out into nature, into fields or trees, it's all it takes to improve your physiological and your psychological well-being. So this whole notion of biophilic design is using those elements and bring them into the internal fabric of the building so that we can make the occupants of buildings healthier and happier and more productive. We know there are benefits on the body. A number of studies have shown quite conclusively that there's improved stress response, lower heart rate, lower pulse rate, and so on. You get quite clearly demonstrated through the use of these natural materials. And in the case of school children, for example, that school can be one of the most stressful activities of their life. So we can use these natural design components. It can have significant and long-lasting beneficial impacts. We know that there are benefits on the brain. There are studies, again, that are detailed in the Planet Ark report that compare the behaviour of aged care residents in aged care facilities, both in predominantly man-made environments to those in natural environments, including wood. And in the natural environments, they're much more talkative, they're much more friendly. So again, we can use these materials to have a significant benefit overall. Another one is that we know that wood is hygroscopic, which means it'll either absorb or emit moisture depending on the prevailing conditions. So if we're in a very moist environment like North Queensland in the summer, the timber will help to moderate that by absorbing some of that moisture. Okay. And similarly, if you're in an air-conditioned office with very low humidity, they will have the effect of returning some of that moisture to balance effect. So certainly the improved health that we get, there's a lot of benefits that we get from this type of design. I mean, not least that people love timber. We did a survey 3 years ago, and well over 96% of people just love the look and feel of timber. So you've got that natural benefit there. Another one, of course, is that timber can be a lot quicker to construct. A lot of particularly the larger buildings now use what we call mass timber or engineered timber. There are a number of different types of that: cross-laminated timber, glue-lam, laminated veneer lumber, and a number of others. And so that's now being used to create some significantly larger buildings than was possible previously. And one of the benefits that timber brings is that it's typically prefabricated off-site. It's done to a very high level of precision because it's produced in a factory, not on a working environment where obviously the conditions for production are absolute optimum. And then they're shipped to the site where they're installed. It's essentially like a glorified IKEA. And to put that into context, luckily I was lucky enough to visit a building called Brock Commons last year. It's a university residence building in Vancouver in Canada, and it's currently the tallest timber building in the world. It's 18 stories tall. The ground floor is concrete, the 2 lift shafts are concrete, but apart from that, everything else in the building is engineered timber, and that building was erected in 9.5 weeks.
Wow, okay.
It would have taken considerably longer to build that building using any other manufacturing technique. So timber can be much, much quicker to build with, and very, very high levels of accuracy of construction and so on. So you've certainly got the benefit there of the use of off-site prefabrication and very, very fast to build. On top of that, another significant benefit that timber plays, particularly in Northern Europe, where they've got much colder climate than we have here in Australia, is that timber has an extremely high level of what we call thermal resistance. To give you some idea, it's 15 times the thermal resistance of brick or concrete, about 400 times that of steel. If you think about putting a steel spoon in a pan of boiling water, you can hold it for maybe a couple of seconds. You put a wooden spoon in a pan of boiling water, you can hold it for many minutes. And that's because of this thermal resistance. And so if you use that in a building, what it does, it keeps all the heat in the winter and the heat out in the summer, so that your costs of heating and cooling are significantly less than they would be with using other materials.
So that then would, I imagine, be another environmental benefit, essentially.
Oh, absolutely. Because we're using less energy to heat and cool buildings. Absolutely. So there's a financial benefit, of course, but there's a consequential environmental benefit as well. Another interesting benefit that timber provides relates to flammability. Because, of course, one of the questions I regularly get asked is, won't the building simply burn down? Any building will burn down. No building is built so that it won't burn, because just about anything will. Buildings are designed so that it can be safely evacuated in the event of a fire. And one of the benefits of timber is its behavior in the event of a fire is extremely predictable. Because what happens, particularly with engineered timber, with larger pieces of timber, they will char on the outside, and that basically slows down the burning process. So yes, they will continue to burn, but they burn at a very slow, predictable rate, aided by this charring process, so that we know exactly how the building is going to perform. The building I mentioned earlier, Brock Commons, I was in that building last year with the Chief Fire Engineer of Vancouver, and he said, this is comfortably the safest building in Vancouver, because we know exactly how it performed. And similarly, the fire engineers in London are on record as saying they would rather go into a timber building that's on fire than a concrete and steel one. Because the problem with a concrete and steel building, it will at some point fail catastrophically, and you never know when that point is going to be. Whereas with a timber building, its behaviour is much more consistent and predictable.
So I wanted to ask you about the steps that you're taking to promote some of these benefits, particularly the environmental benefits. There is a tactic, I suppose, that you're using called the wood encouragement policy. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about that?
I can, yes. Wood encouragement policies have been around for a number of years in countries like Japan, the UK, Netherlands, France. The first one was adopted here in Australia by La Trobe Council in Victoria in December of 2014. And what a wood encouragement policy essentially requires is that wood is at least considered as the primary structural material. Doesn't mean that it has to be the material that's used, but that it's at least in the consideration set. And councils are doing this for a number of reasons. Obviously, the environmental benefits that timber provides, the health benefits that timber provides, the efficiency and therefore economy that timber provides. So there are a lot of reasons. So if it's done right, councils should be able to reduce their carbon emissions and save money by building using timber. And so I speak to a lot of councils. I've done many presentations to councils to get them to understand why it is that a wood encouragement policy would be of benefit and interest for them. Because of course they can then use that to promote their own environmental credentials. And to date, there are 2 local government authorities, 15 local councils and 1 state, Tasmania, became the first state in Australia to adopt a statewide wood encouragement policy, which they adopted just over a year ago in June of 2017. And we're certainly seeing a lot more interest from councils. I was at the Local Government Association Annual General Assembly in Canberra and did a presentation there to about 500 mayors, CEOs, general managers and councillors. And many came up to me afterwards and said, that was great, really interesting, and what they want to know more. So it's an area that we're starting to see grow, and certainly council design is moving towards the use of timber. Certainly.
Have you found much resistance in those conversations?
Very little. I guess the resistance that we do get is to some degree the fear of the unknown. And as we alluded to earlier on, it's about availability of timber, and that's a legitimate question to ask. But when we talk about the environmental benefits, the health benefits, most people tend to understand and agree with that. So there seems to be little debate, if you like, but it's more then about, and of course in some of the council areas where forestry is prevalent, there's an additional benefit for them in terms of maintaining local employment levels and so on, and being able to provide locally procured timber where possible. So there's no overt resistance. It's probably more based on fear of the unknown than anything to do with timber per se, I would say. Right. And one initiative that I thought was particularly commendable, East Fremantle over in WA was one of the very first city councils to adopt a wood encouragement policy. Clearly, they don't have forestry in their backyard, so they implemented a policy because of its environmental health, economic benefits, etc. But to their eternal credit, they didn't just introduce one policy, they introduced two. One was a council policy for all council and public buildings. Another was a general policy, which was aimed at all their ratepayers, saying, if you're refurbishing a house or rebuilding a house, we want you to consider timber for these reasons. That was their own initiative, and I commend them for it, because and hopefully many other councils will be so sort of forward-thinking and progressive and use similar initiatives.
I wanted to hear directly from councils who've committed to wood encouragement policies about their reasons for doing so and what they hope to achieve. So I gave Sandy Cam of Latrobe Council a call.
Sandy, I've been talking to a few different people about wood encouragement policies. The